at another Heaney poem today, the poem called Punishment. Punishment was published in the collection of poems called North, and what is most notable about these poems is that their focus is much more on the concept of violence, particularly in relation to political conflict, looking at the Troubles in Ireland. It's part of the group of poems that are also to do with the bog bodies, and this is another poem that is to do with the bog bodies. So it can be compared with, for example, Strange Fruit is a great poem to look at in conjunction, especially if you were thinking about that idea of violence or political conflict. So we'll get started. I'll read it through and then we'll make some annotations. Of the halter at the nape of her neck, the wind on her naked front. It blows her nipples to amber beads, it shakes the frail rigging of her ribs. I can see her drowned, body in the bog, the weighing stone, the floating rods and boughs, under which at first she was a barked sapling that is dug up, oak bone, brain firkin, her shaved head like a stubble of black corn, her blindfold a soiled bandage, her noose a ring to store the memories of love. Little adulteress, before they punished you, you were flaxen-haired, undernourished, and your tar-black face was beautiful. My poor scapegoat, I almost love you, but would have cast, I know, the stones of silence. I am the artful voyeur of your brain's exposed and darkened combs, your muscles webbing, and all your numbered bones. I who have stood dumb when your betraying sisters, called in tar, wept by the railings, who would connive in civilized outrage, yet understand the exact and tribal, intimate revenge. Whoa! An incredible poem, but a really dark poem to read. Very, very kind of emotive and emotional. Okay, let's get cracking. So Punishment as a title, just one word title. So again, it makes it really clear that this is a poem about violence, that this is a poem about conflict. And you might argue that it's a poem about vengeance. Just thinking about the connotations of this abstract noun here, I think that there is definitely a suggestion perhaps of vengeance or revenge. Okay, let's get started with this very, very personal opening. You know, we've got first person pronoun, and this is all about this kind of idea of empathy, walking around in another person's shoes. Heaney says, I can feel the tug of the halter at the nape. So notice this modal verb here, suggesting what he is able to do. And then we've very, very Heaney, this kind of sensory language, but this is all here about creating a sense of empathy. So I can feel the tug of the halter at the nape of her neck. Look what he's up to here. Yeah, we've got this sort of anaphoric structure here with the repeated preposition of at the beginning of these two lines, although the enjambement means that you read it without that focus. I can feel the tug of the halter at the nape of her neck. Nape of her neck. The wind on her naked front. Notice here we've got the nape, neck, naked. Alexa, skip. Sorry about that, but Star Wars music just came on. We can't possibly have that in the background of this. So we've got this alliteration. Now, if you're interested in defining types of alliteration, the repeated N is nasal, like my voice right now because I've got a cold. So we've got nasal alliteration, bringing together nape, neck, and naked front. And what do these words all have to have in common with each other? It's all parts of the body. So there's a real kind of presentation of her physicality here. Nape of her neck and then her naked front. Why is she naked, we ask ourselves. This is part of this punishment, isn't it? It's part of the humiliation. So she is vulnerable, yeah? She is vulnerable, but it is also part humiliation, okay? Excuse me. He's very much putting himself into the position of either her or someone there. Now, what's notable is we don't know who this girl is. All we have is the sort of the mystery of the third person pronoun. Yeah. There's a kind of sense of, there's a sort of sense of lack of identity. So no identity at this moment. Part of the punishment. Okay, moving on. It blows her nipples to amber beads. It shakes the frail rigging of her ribs. Now, this is very interesting. So obviously we've got this idea about exposure. It ties in with the concept of vulnerability, or this idea of her needing to be humiliated, that it is of course referring to the wind. So we've got the first kind of, I suppose, association with death here, mainly because of the adjective amber, which will make you think of, the gemstone, but known for preserving species. So, break open a gemstone and you find a little, mosquito or whatever preserved in there. So there's this link to preservation. So we're being reminded of her body being preserved. It obviously accentuates this idea of the cold as well. So further punishment. But I think it's this metaphor here that is super powerful. It shakes, as in again the wind shakes the frail rigging of her ribs. Now we learn later on that she's undernourished, but again this idea of her vulnerability in this adjective. She's thin, but it's the rigging of her ribs. The metaphor of like a boat, but to be the bones. And of course she's shaking, she's trembling, so you've got the idea that she's trembling from the cold, yeah, but also, second interpretation, she's trembling from fear. Again, notice this focus on the body. So the fact that she's naked, it gives us a hint of why she's being punished. It's obviously to do with sex. The actual body that this is in reference to, that was dug out of a bog in Germany, I can't remember what it was called, it begins with a W, but it was supposedly a young woman who was put to death because of adultery. So the idea of the nudity links in with typical punishments for adultery. Okay, right. Now, look, we have the same structure again. So I can, but now it's I can see her drowned. He's not literal. This is about imagination. Yeah? Imagination and empathy. Now, this is really interesting, right? Because if you read it, just the line, you read, I can see her drowned. Yeah? Like a verb, I can see her drowned. But it's not. It's an adjective. You've got to read through with the enjambment. I can see her drowned body in the bog. So she wasn't killed by drowning. This is after. So this is after death. I can see her drowned body in the bog. Note this alliteration. In this case, it's plosive alliteration. Creating, I think, in this case, you've got to be able to say why when you're picking out alliteration, because sometimes it just happens to be there. But I think here this is about creating a sort of heavy sound, body in the bog, and that works again with things like the elongated vowel sounds. So the plosive alliteration and the elongated vowel sounds, drowned, stone, bows. Note the kind of half rhyme here as well. Elongated vowel sounds. The weighing stone, the floating rods and bows. This is interesting. Obviously you've got anaphora again here with the, but you've got the weighing stone and then the floating. So you've got juxtaposition between her body and nature. Yeah. So all weighted down. Obviously, this is to make her sink, just in case. Realised. Yeah, and then you've got the floating rods and bows. Now this is interesting here, because remember we were talking about nature, under which at first, sorry, an identity, under which at first she was a barked sapling. Ooh, Pavarotti in the background, that's rather nice. So we've got this metaphor here. So she was a barked sapling, i.e. a young tree, that is dug up. So again, totally dehumanized, yeah? No identity. She is literally a tree, yeah? A young tree. That's all her body looks like, is floating wood. Now, these compound nouns are interesting. Just write that down, compound nouns. Just in case you weren't sure, so it's when you take two words and you chuck them together with a hyphen to create a complete noun phrase. So compounds and bringing two things together, like in science. So oak bone, brain firkin. Now oak bone, obviously, think about this works because we've just had the metaphor of her being a tree. But oak is solid, yeah, and strong. This is to do with the fact that her bones have survived. Yeah, her bones have survived. And then you've got brain firkin. This describes this. It's an oak bone, it's an oak bone brain firkin. A firkin is an archaic term, archaic meaning no longer in use, so old word. An archaic term for a container. So actually the image is quite gruesome because basically her skull is now nothing more than a container for liquid. Yeah, so skull, so dark, is now no more than a container for liquid. So again, it's that idea of her being thoroughly dehumanized. And then we get more information about her head, yeah, because brain firkin, so skull. Now we're into imagining, okay, because obviously we can't tell this, you know, we don't know. But her shaved head, like a stubble of black corn. So we've got this little simile. Now you'll be interested to know that shaving the head was part of the routine punishment, because again, it's this idea of humiliation. It also strips away identity as well, because you're taking away a person's hair, very much a part of who they are. So we're imagining now her shaved head, like a stubble of black corn, her blindfold, a soiled bandage. So this adjective here is interesting because it's about being tainted, dirty, corrupted, and she's blindfolded. Okay, so they take away sight, which is also, you know, increasing the fear. There's absolutely, it's ghastly. Her noose, a ring. So now we're kind of getting a sense of how she was killed. So it was execution by hanging. This ring, not like ring of a finger, it would be, sorry, that's too big a hand. This would be round her neck. But look at this on Jumpermore. Look at how clever Heaney is. I'm just writing ENJ for on Jumpermore. Okay, so her noose, a ring to store the memories of love. Oh, this is terrifying, right? This is a sentimental image, yeah? It links in to the idea of adultery, but it gives a motivation. She did it for love, yeah? And this is what she's being punished for. So the only thing that she now has to store the memories of her love is the noose around her neck. I think there's also something interesting about the idea of the cyclical nature of the ring as well. Obviously this is all highly metaphorical, but it really creates a sort of sense of like pathos, which is, you know, extreme sadness, extreme pity. Right, now we've got this shift in tone. Examiners love that phrase. Shift in tone right here, because look what Heaney's doing. He's addressing the reader not the reader, sorry, he is addressing the woman, the body, directly. Little adulteress. So this adjective, the base adjective little, suggests her youth and therefore her innocence. There is a startling juxtaposition here. I'd go as far as to call it an oxymoron. You know, the idea of little, innocent, sweet, and adulterous, sin, corruption. I am, sorry, just making sure that we're absolutely happy with the term adulteress, meaning female, because it's adulteress rather than adulterer, but person who cheats, has an affair. So little adulteress. Before they punished you, note the sort of ambiguity and the mystery, ambiguity, hard word to spell, of the third person pronoun. Who is this they? Does it even matter? Before they punished you, so just flipping over the page, excuse me. You were flaxen haired, so blonde. You were flaxen haired, undernourished. Again, do you remember the whole idea about the ribs? The rigging of the ribs. Lovely bit of assonance there. I should add that to your notes on the previous page. Should have put that in. You were flaxen haired, undernourished, and your tar black face was beautiful. Oh, tar black face. So this little adjective, tar black, gives us an indication of what else was done to her as punishment. This poor woman was being tarred and feathered. An absolutely horrific torture. It's a torture system. But this is, excuse me, there is a kind of sense of this juxtaposition, okay, between the horror of the tar black face and her beauty, this respect for her beauty. Now, Heaney is like, he's feeling it here, yeah? So this is like big time empathy, yeah? My poor scapegoat. I mean, there's so much in just that possessive pronoun here. So we've got possessive pronoun, my, that he kind of feels a connection to her. You've got the adjective poor, again suggesting the empathy. But look at this word, look at this noun, scapegoat, yeah? When you call someone a scapegoat, the suggestion is that, you know, they've not actually done something wrong, but they're just being blamed. So now we've got the concept of blame and responsibility, but also injustice. So now we're even questioning whether or not she even was an adulteress. Or perhaps she was, but the fact is that she's the one being punished, not the man involved. Okay. I almost love you. Now, let's look at this. We need to look at this cheeky little adverb here. I almost love you. But he can't. Not quite. Yeah, he can't quite love her. Note the fact that we're in present tense here. So we're kind of shifting into a different time, because the bog body, and we're talking about the Iron Age, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. But now, this present tense, we're back into this kind of, well, hang on a minute, what's going on in these current times? So, I almost love you, but would have cast. I know, feel the sort of guilt and self-awareness in that little verb phrase, self-awareness. But would have cast, I know, the stones of silence. This lovely sibilant metaphor. Sibilant, of course, meaning sibilance, a noun, repeated S, but I'm using it as an adjective here. Sibilant metaphor. It's also biblical allusion. Can't remember the exact phrase from the Bible, but it's the one about, you know, when they're stoning a woman to death, and Jesus says, you know, whoever is without sin, cast the first stone. So this is a reminder. The biblical allusion reminds us the idea of sin in everyone. So there's a sense of, again, highlighting the injustice of it. And he's saying that he would have cast the stones of silence. But if we look at this metaphor, why the stones of silence? This is about standing by, looking on, and not speaking up. If you think about the sort of slight buzzword at the moment in education about being a bystander, that's what he's talking about here, the idea of being a bystander. Okay, now we're still in this present tense. I'm writing PT for that, present tense. I am the artful voyeur. Now this is interesting. Okay, so this idea about gaze, about watching, but it's artful. So we might have this idea again reminding of us of the fact that this is in a museum. There's a kind of, it's sort of suggesting that there is a kind of justification behind the voyeurism, that it's artful voyeurism. But again, the word voyeur also has sort of ever so slight sort of sexual undertones. That perhaps there is something about her nudity here that is troubling. So I am the artful voyeur of your brains exposed and darkened combs, your muscles webbing, and all your numbered bones. Again, that reminder that we're in the museum here. But this concept of exposure, so you've got again the idea of the body, that it's almost like an invasion. An invasion of her privacy. It feels, I tell you what this feels like, I mentioned it before, but Strange Fruit, you know, where it talks about unswaddling the wet fern of her hair and letting the air at her leathery beauty. This kind of idea of that they're exposing her to things that she shouldn't be exposed to. And in this case, she's being exposed to him, to a man. Okay. Excuse me. And here we get the, I think, real kind of crux of the poem, the most important moment in the poem. So again, notice that focus on his experience here, his sense. I who have stood dumb. Now, dumb in this case means silent. So we're back, aren't we, to the stones of silence from before. I who have stood dumb. But it could also mean stupid or foolish. Yeah? What I'm interested is this tense. What tense are we in here? Have stood. To have stood. This is the present perfect tense. Okay? So meaning it has ended. It is done. But it's still rooted in the present. I have stood rather than I had stood. So it's a recent action. So the fact that it is a recent action is linking this very clearly to the Troubles. So we're now in that kind of the Irish conflict here. I, who have stood dumb when your betraying sisters, called in tar, wept by the railings. So yeah, when you're betraying sisters. So no, there's the idea of like sisterhood, i.e. women just like her, but in this future time, or current time at that moment. But betraying, note the fact that this is an adjective. This isn't sisters who have been betrayed. This is betraying sisters. So this is basically the women who got involved with British soldiers, for example, with the British soldiers. So this is the kind of punishment that would have happened that Heaney himself wouldn't have taken part in, but hasn't stood up and said no, that this is unacceptable. So when you're betraying sisters, cold in tar. So again, the tarring and the feathering. Oh, it's just so ghastly. Cold is an interesting word because it's a piece of material that's normally used on a baby's head. So this is a really kind of jarring metaphor because it's something that you would associate with, you know, looking after a child. But here it's covered in tar, weeping by the railings. So women were chained to the railings, and of course they're weeping. Yeah, because one, they're in pain, in intense pain, and they're also humiliated, and they're also dehumanized. So let's just continue reading. I have stood dumb when your betraying sisters, called in tar, wept by the railings. Who would connive in civilized outrage, yet understand the exact and tribal intimate revenge? Note again this modal verb. I said again, I'm not sure that I've mentioned it before. So this sort of conditional. I think this oxymoron, civilized outrage, is really, really important, because what he's reminding us of is that we are in a civilized, this is a civilized world committing atrocity. Committing atrocities, civilized outrage, yet understand the exact. So he's basically saying that he is the kind of person who would, you know, be shocked, be horrified, say that it is outrageous that a civilized world is committing these atrocities, yet understand. Note here, we're back to empathy, but it's empathy with the people doling out the punishment. Yet understand the exact and tribal. So there's almost like this savage force to it. The exact and tribal, intimate revenge. A reminder again about the kind of idea about it being adultery or it being betrayal. So it really truly is. It really truly is that that kind of idea about vengeance we talked about right at the beginning. I think this poem is sort of in tone quite sort of typically Heaney. Just going back to the beginning, I was thinking just before, like, look at the way that he just gets straight in. Do you know what I mean? That we're in on media res, straight into the kind of passion and the feeling and the. Oh, sorry, I just wrote it without you being able to see. In media res, meaning in the middle of things. In terms of things like form, for example, there's a lot of irregularity. So we've got what am I writing? Metrical irregularity. Although you do have the odd moment of rhyme. There's, for example, here, you know, the drowned and the bows. And there's another moment later on in the poem here where we have the combs and the bones. So the moments of rhyme are about sort of, so the moments of rhyme is about emphasis. It's about highlighting those important dramatic moments. What an incredible poem. I hope that helps. If you've got any questions, just let me know. Thanks very much.